Thank you, Ann. Thank everybody for coming tonight. I was asked coming up here, where did you come up with this? And I will tell you, because as Ann mentioned, I'm really known for the Civil War, World War II, and believe it or not, some Cold War type of stuff that I've developed not too long ago. I did this out of respect in honor of a fellow that I truly, truly liked and respected, and he did eclectic type of presentations for OLLI, O-L-L-I, Osher Lifelong Living, connected with George Mason University, and he passed away from cancer. And so once he did, and he didn't tell anybody he had cancer, so I called his wife and told her how much he meant to me. And I always went to his presentations because they were crazy. And it was so good. I mean, Jack the Ripper type stuff, spaghetti western, where he invented the wah wah woman. Remember the lady that sings wah 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 wah? You know, he created her name and everything. And so I decided, I told her I was going to create something in his honor that would be totally off the wall like he would do it. And that's what this is tonight. So I've received really pretty good feedback on this, to the point that I'm just finishing up another, quote, eclectic presentation. Maybe I'll come back if I'm invited after tonight to present it. So anyway, thanks to everybody for coming. I appreciate it, and let's go ahead and get on with the show. Okay, the lengths we will go to for beauty knows no bounds. Plastic surgery, chemical peels, and tattooed makeup are all extreme measures to achieve that picture-perfect look, but at least we got our doctor's seal of approval on their safety status. Beauty addicts from years gone by weren't so lucky. From skin regimens brimming from poisons and parasite-based diets to breathtakingly tight corsets and the hottest hairstyles. This presentation will highlight some 13 of the deadliest trends that claim their very own fashion victims. 13. Now, before we go on, this is a cartoon that was made in 1862, second year of the American Civil War. And what you'll see here later on will appropriately change colors to the color it should be later on. Okay, everybody's familiar with this, right? Corsets. And corsets gained popularity in the 16th century when Catherine de Medici, wife of French King Henry II, banned women with thick waist from attending the court. To achieve that hourglass so popular at the time, women's corsets would be laced as tight as possible, you can see what's going on there, with the recommended, take a guess, how many inches was the recommended waist? How much? Boy, you're right on them. I tell you, it's 18. So kudos, fantastic job. 18 inches, folks. That's like one of my legs, I think. But anyway, you can see a beautiful lady styling on the left and a corset up top that you're probably familiar with. You've at least seen it. Now check this thing out here on the right, upper right. That's iron. How'd you like to be sitting in that thing for a while? Right there, yeah, you're right, ooh. And that corset is from the late 16th century. That's how far back. Now, this corset right here incorporated whalebone, which was standard back in the 1730 to 1740 time frame. They already had a bad reputation in the 1800s, with doctors frowning upon them and a plethora of literature condemning the undergarment. Ladies wearing their corsets often experience headaches, breathing trouble, and fainting. Shock City. And on the right, this is a period illustration. There she is, dancing and fainting at the same time. Okay, I'm going to do just a little bit more on corsets. Now, hey, gals, this wasn't just for women. We got into this too, because we wanted that V shape that, you know, all of us guys look like all the time. And it was to feature our strong health and attractiveness, like the hourglass figure women desired. Now, on the left is a 19th century ad. Corsets also turned out to be a good foundation piece for formal wear, like tuxedos. And this illustration is 1850 to 1859. Yeah, you got it. Boy, if you're doing ooh right now, wait. Okay. However, there were issues, just a few, particularly early on. Besides not being able to breathe properly, there were widespread reports of broken ribs, and extreme lacing led to displacement of internal organs, deformed rib cages, and even death. On the left is an illustration depicting what could happen. On the far left is normal. On the right is not what you want. And that's the corset and the effect of it. And had a compression of ribs, and the liver and the stomach was being forced downwards. In the early 20th century, the S-bend, right here, known as the Edwardian corset, came into vogue. And this is a comparison of the old style versus the new Edwardian or S-bend. That featured a rigid, straight bust inserted into the center front of the corset, forcing the torso forward and hips out to jut out in the back. Now, it was intended to be less injurious than other corsets by exerting less pressure on the stomach area. However, any benefits were more than counterbalanced by injury caused to the back due to the unnatural posture. The bust was also lowered, and corsets provided much less support for the breast. By 1908, corsets began to fall from favor as the silhouette changed to a higher waistline and more naturalistic form. Early forms of brassieres were introduced, and the girdle, more concerned with reducing the hips rather than the waist, soon took the place of the corset. Okay, now we get into some interesting, unbelievable. Late 18th century, there was an Englishman, Dr. George A. Scott. We're not talking George C. We're talking George A. Scott, who was a prolific advertiser of electric devices and other quack products in America. He took advantage of the confusion that existed back then in the day over magnetism versus electricity. He billed his products as truly electric and claimed they were the key to treating all sorts of ailments, including, get this, constipation, malaria, lameness, rheumatism, blood diseases, paralysis, and hair loss. In reality, the manufacturer for this was the Pall Mall Electric Association that really used magnetic iron rods. Even though this particular ad on the right admits the association with magnetics, they continued to shamelessly reference their products as electric and incented others to do so for monetary gains. As you can see right here, agents earn big profits. And it was very popular for several years. By the 20th century, Advertising for Dr. Scott's products disappeared, and presumably, and hopefully, he went out of business. Okay, here we go. Number 2. The ones coming up aren't as, I won't dwell on them as long as I did the corset. It was just too rich not to. Okay, for centuries, pale skin was deemed the height of fashion. Tan, freckled faces were considered improper and a sign of being a lowly peasant. Both men and women would go to extreme lengths to keep their faces as white as possible, using paste, powders, and potions. Now on the far left, that's Queen Marie Antoinette. And her ghostly pale complexion was the beauty standard. Now, what was the key ingredient in all of this? We all know now, lead. Very friendly substance. Initial use of lead-based makeup led to baldness and inflamed skin. Continuing use disguising skin defects led to even more makeup. Now, the consummate example is Queen Elizabeth I. She was the most prominent. She began using lead makeup to hide her smallpox scars, prompting a trend that likely led to her death and those of many of her subjects. Lead poisoning destroys the nervous system, causing paralysis and brain damage. Lead palsy is characterized by localized paralysis of hands and dropped wrist. This right here, folks, those are dropped wrists, but they're also, and back then they were known as the dangles, which was a occupational hazard with printers. Finally, if you think the days of lead in makeup have passed, think again. A recent discovery found that hundreds of lipsticks across the world still contain lead, but the amounts are so low that hopefully it won't affect you. Okay, number 3. How many folks are familiar with crinoline skirts? Okay, beautiful. Thank you. By the mid-19th century, the epitome of elegance for women was to dramatically distort their natural body shape wearing a crinoline skirt. Now, it was patented in 1856, just before the American Civil War, by a fellow in Paris. And it was a hooped body petticoat that was as large as reasonably possible. Skirts were almost 2 meters wide, were the height of fashion. And by that, we're talking 6.5 feet wide or 18 feet in circumference. On the left is Princess Dagmar of Denmark wearing a crinoline in the 1860s. Now, over here, steel cage crinolines were some of the most popular. Also whalebone, as I mentioned before, with corsets. This steel hooped cage crinoline underskirt was shown as of 1856. It was made from cotton braid covered steel, cotton twill, and plain weave, double cloth tape, cane, and metal. Catch this. The Douglas and Sherwood's Hoop Skirt Factory in New York, which was one of the biggest producers of these crinolines, it employed 800 women and produced over 8,000 hoop skirts per day. Now, to do that, they required a ton of steel per day. So, okay. Most common problem, well, it's pretty obvious. Sheer amount of size it took up. At social events, they were horribly impractical. One contemporary criticized them by claiming that one woman in her skirt took up the space of 3 men. Now, these are some of the jokes of the day. All this stuff. There's a lady putting on her crinoline skirt, as you can see. This is the best that I love. Look at where he is. bringing her down. He's on the other side of that barister right there because he couldn't fit in the stairs. And here we go at a formal affair. You can see they're really close to each other. So, okay. Now, crinolines were worn by Victorian women of every social class across the Western world, from royalty to factory workers. Textile firms instructed female employees to leave their hoops and crinolines at home, as several deaths had occurred when crinolines were dragged into the machinery. Unsuspecting fashionistas were blown to their deaths in strong, windy conditions while also being run under carriage wheels. Now, worst of all, crinolines were highly flammable. So it gets worse, resulting in many deaths by fire. Unaware of their proximity to a candle, a hot stove, or fireplace, ladies would often go up in flames. Of course, there's a self-admiring lady and not knowing what's happening below. Catch this, 1863, middle of the American Civil War. Up to 3,000 people died in a Chilean church fire that was blamed in part on the flammability of the skirts because they blocked the exits. 1 year later, in '64, it was reported that in the previous 14 years, at least 39,927, trust me, it's the number they got, women had died worldwide in crinoline-related fires. Although flame retardant fabrics were available, we were talking about this earlier, they knew that these things would catch on fire, but vanity. They were thought to be unattractive and therefore unpopular. So you had to go with the style, which would burn you up. Okay, flammable hairstyles, and there are three groupings. The towering updos. This is the late 18th century. Tall tresses took off with women using hair cushions and false hair made out of human, horses, or goat hair, reaching dizzying heights. Several included theatrical touches, such as the miniature sailing, vessels, and flags. Forgetful of the towering tinder atop their heads, many ladies were set on fire by chandeliers and candles. A London paper even reported of a woman's wig and headdress being struck by lightning because of the height of the hairpins, which supposedly set her on fire. Okay, next. I bet you a lot of folks here remember celluloid. Okay, it's right there. Anyway, that's the second group. In the early 1900s, celluloid was all the rage, replacing genuine, expensive ivory and tortoiseshell in various accessories, such as hair combs. And you might remember tortoiseshell as a name. It was referred to as French ivory to give it a little bit more snob appeal for marketing purposes. And upper left, you can see some of the various items. Minor problem. This too was highly flammable, that just the mere proximity to a heat source, even storage in an attic or a sunny window, could cause a comb to burst into flames or even explode. It caused a number of factory fires and occasionally burst into flames on women's heads and in the hands of children. And if fire didn't consume you, release of its toxic fumes would. So, by 1940, because of its detrimental characteristics, celluloid combs and other assorted accessories weren't used much. This is priceless. It may be hard to read this, but this is a newspaper article about an aged citizen, a senior citizen, losing his life while combing his long gray beard because of celluloid. Okay, here's the third group. Hairspray horror. Come on, we all know this one. 1950s, hairspray kept curls fixed in place and tresses perfectly coiffed, as they were the height of fashion and hairstyle of choice for many, maintaining everything required a lot of hairspray. Now, tell me how well this would work today. That ad right there. Be a smart girl advertisement. Not sure that would cut it today. Before 1970, hairspray contained vinyl chloride, a known carcinogen, and it was linked to angiosarcoma of the liver in humans. Even more troubling was that the manufacturers were aware of its toxic effects for nearly a decade before removing it from the market. It was replaced by methylene chloride, which was also later recalled due to similar carcinogenic effects. In the 1970s, a widespread campaign against aerosol CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, I think we all remember that, which was extremely harmful to the atmosphere. And it contributed holes into the ozone layer. And this led to an official ban in the United States, with a couple of exceptions. Certain medical applications, such as asthma inhalers. In 2008, even that was history. All use of CFCs were banned. Today, hairspray is still used as it's considered a hair essential. Although CFC-free aerosols are gone, they will emit VOCs. So we go from one ism to another. Volatile organic compounds, which still affect the ozone and the environment. Finally, come on. Any guy here knows you've done this. Particularly having a beer and you just want to have some fun. Propellants in aerosol cans are highly flammable, and when in contact with fire can cause explosions. Empty aerosol cans are now considered hazardous waste in the United States. Okay, this is going to get you. This is the 2-slider. Radium skin cream. What could go wrong? This radium was discovered in 1898 by Marie and Pierre Curie, and it generated a great deal of scientific interest, even winning them the Nobel Prize in Physics. Soon, the medical and other commercial uses were found for this radioactive cream. Women began to smother their faces in radioactive cream in their quest for a face with a youthful, healthy glow, even in the dark. This is the product that went ballistic, went viral, called Faux Radia. It's French. It topped the charts. And here they are, a couple ladies, peddling this stuff at a trade show. Right here, Faux Radia, right here. It was associated with Dr. Alfred Curie, who was a regular doctor, to give it credibility. He stopped his association with the company the moment the regulations surrounding the commercial use of radium changed. However, many women continue to apply their radioactive makeup on a daily basis. Not surprisingly, radiation poisoning and cancer figures soared. Okay, this will get you. There were 2 popular techniques for applying radium. Obviously, the mud program up here on your face, and there's an ad here on the left. about applying the mud, and that's 1944. On the right, that's 1922, getting the mud treatment. Now, the other process was by way of luminescent paint. It was known as undark, giving one a glow-in-the-dark appeal. It was a concoction that combined radium with zinc sulfide. There were no safety precautions. Scores of girls as young as 11 and young women painted themselves and were referred to as the radium girls. Sadly, they died terrible, painful deaths. Now, here's the little story I want to tell you. When Amelia Maggia died in 1927, her cause of death was listed as syphilis. However, her friends and family wanted to prove that she had in fact died from radium poisoning. After all said and done, they got a court order to exhume her body. And upon opening the coffin, they found that her remains were still faintly glowing. There you go, that's it. No. Isn't that something? So even in death, the radium girls continued to glow. Yep. How is it so far? It's going to get worse. Okay. Okay. Women weren't the only fashion victims in history. In the late 1800s, hat makers, they were called hatters, used a toxic substance, mercury nitrate, as part of the process for turning fur of small animals, like a beaver, into felt for hats. And you can see over here on the left. And that was processed with mercury. Over time, hatters exhibited apparent changes in personality, and worse, their erratic behavior resulted in the term mad as a hatter. Everybody's got it. So, mercury is a neurotoxin and attacks the nervous system. Basically, minor issues. You can't walk, you can't talk, you can't think. Okay? The symptoms: drooling, hair loss, teeth come loose, uncontrollable muscle twitching, stumbling about with uncoordinated lurching gait, and a confused state with slurred speech and trembling hands. Hence, the hatters were sometimes mistaken for drunks. And here is a perfect example. Looks normal. Now, in Danbury, Connecticut, where hat making was a major industry, the ailment became known as the Danbury Shakes. By World War II, use of mercury in hat making was banned. Now, it had nothing to do with health problems, not for the reasons you would think, but because mercury was needed for detonators in World War II. So disturbing was the Mad Hatter that he was popularized in comic books. Here we are, in Batman. And that's Batman number 49 in 1948. And I say 49, that's the 49th magazine. And later on, as villainous character in the TV series Batman. If you remember that, he was there. Now, I'm going to give you an aside. I normally don't do this, but I think you'll appreciate this. Who killed Lincoln? John Wilkes Booth, right? Okay. Who killed Booth? Very few people know this. Back in the day, a lot of people knew it. It was a fellow by the name of Boston Corbett. Believe it or not, he was here in Vienna in '64. In Vienna, on Air Hill. Most are not aware, as I mentioned. And he was a sick pup who eventually castrated himself. Yeah, that's sick, right? He was from Boston before the Civil War and had worked in the hat industry. He was a Mad Hatter. Most people don't know that. The serious Civil War historians are aware of that. So just FYI. And his name was Sergeant Boston Corbett. Okay, to move on. Atropa belladonna, known as belladonna, meaning beautiful women in Italian. However, its English name, which was deadly nightshade, is really more accurate. It was deceptively named lethal poison as it's both sickly sweet and toxic to the touch. In the Middle Ages, women used it for cosmetic purposes, as it created a reddish color on the skin, which made it an effective, if dangerous, form of rouge. The problem was the active ingredient was a powerful killer, alkaloid atropine. Its roots had the highest concentration of the alkaloids, but every part of the plant was poisonous to varying degrees. Too strong a mix could lead to heart disease, mental illness, and/or spontaneous abortion. Prolonged use caused visual disturbances, inability to focus the eyes, increased heart rate, and eventually blindness with enough use. A single leaf or only a couple of its pretty berries could be lethal if ingested. Now, this is a apothecary bottle, and this is a bottle pendant that you would wear around your neck, you know, when you wanted to freshen up, freshen the face. So, on an as desired basis. This is great. Especially prized for concocting eye drops that dilated the pupils. It gave a user a friendly, sexy, doe-eyed look, apparently a super hot look in Italy at the time. Now, these are two starlets in the 1940s, 1950s. Anyone know who she is? That's Arlene Dahl. Before, after. A little bit of difference, right? This is Phyllis Kirk, before and after. Ironically, a more refined version is used today to dilate your and my pupils during eye exams and is a popular homeopathic remedy for asthma and arthritis. So, it continues on. Now, this is where I fall apart. This is the one I can deal with poison and, you know, meteors hitting the earth and all that, but I cannot deal with this thing. How many people are familiar with it? Wow, I never heard of it in my life. Foot binding was popular during the Sung dynasty, and that's between the 10th and 13th century. It continued on, believe it or not, to the early 20th century. Women with dainty feet were considered beautiful, even erotic, and it was intended to attract suitors and flaunt one's upper crust status. At its height, the contorted tradition was practiced by approximately 50% of middle-class Chinese families and nearly 100% of the affluent families. All told, it is estimated that 4.5 billion Chinese girls were subjected to this practice. Now, I'm just going to very quickly, because you don't want to hear all of it. And anyway, the process began early, approximately 5 years of age, while the young girls' feet were still supple and their minds had no clue what was coming. So, sparing you the details, as I mentioned, every toe except the big ones, including the arches, were broken. Broken. And then wrapped underneath their feet into this coveted 4.5-inch, what is called a lotus shoe. And there it is, clear. You can see the impact. Here are the toes down here. I mean, it's unbelievable. This cruel practice cut off circulation in the toes and led to infections and gangrene. The feet would be covered in sores and often gave off a foul stench. You had to meticulously tend to them the rest of their lives, and reversal from this was very painful. Anyway, this lotus flower that we mentioned, you know, in the Asian culture, they always have symbols and visions and, you know, symbolic type stuff. It symbolized spiritual enlightenment and rebirth. Meanwhile, they're sending a young girl through this. So, let's move on. Enough of that, huh? Okay, here we go with the stiff collar program. What most know as a collar today started out for both men and women as a large ruff around the neck. And of course, there's Queen Elizabeth, white as any, wearing it. And she was a fashion trendsetter. The logic, and this does make sense when you think about it, it was to protect the edge of your clothing from wear and food from dropping down, as it was more economical to replace a ruff than an entire dress or skirt. Now, competition led to extreme versions. I mean, we got to compete, right? Evolving up to 1.5 feet wide. Look at these things. Seriously hindering a wearer's movement. As the ruff died out, it was replaced by a high, stiff collar down here, which got higher and stiffer over time. By the 1800s, they were very popular, but posed a physical danger. Can anybody guess what might happen? Now, this is attached to a shirt with studs right here, highly starched, stiff high collars grip the man's throat. Under normal, sober conditions, the collar could be quite constrictive, but otherwise harmless. However, if a man fell into a post-dinner drunken stupor, the stiff collar would claim its victim. As a man sat in an armchair and his head dropped to his chest, the collar could block the windpipe and stop the flow of blood to his head. As he slept, he could be suffocated by his own collar. These days, and this is interesting, anyone with an upturned collar looks out of touch. However, polo shirts were actually designed to be worn this way. In 1929, Rene Lacoste created the tennis shirt with an upturned collar to prevent sunburn. It was only when people started wearing polo shirts on a regular basis that they started laying the collars flat. Okay, here you go. Trust me, this is only one slide. From the 1830s to the 1900s, a tapeworm diet with women in the Victorian age era who wanted to achieve what society viewed as beautiful and hoping to attract a husband. The idea was simple and gross. One would take, upper left, a pill containing a tapeworm egg. Once hatched, the parasite would grow inside the host up to, what do you think? How many feet long? 30. Who said 30? Okay, touchdown. That's great. Ingesting part of whatever the host ate. In theory, this enabled the dieter to simultaneously lose weight and eat without worry about calorie intake. Now, this is interesting, this ad right here. Eat with no ill effects. Sure. However, just getting to the desired weight, one faced a number of terrible side effects, and here are a few. Cysts in the brain, spinal cord and eyes, as well as meningitis and epilepsy. If one were able to achieve their desired weight, and this is, I'm really not going there, extraction of the tapeworm was not for the meek, and I'm not going to go there. There are several ways, and you don't want to hear it, and we can't tape it. Okay. In 2015, reality star Khloe Kardashian, in all her glory, suggested that she wanted to get a tapeworm on Keeping Up with the Kardashians. This evoked an article from Vice regarding the legitimacy and dangers of the diet. Claiming concern for public health, the FDA has officially banned this procedure, tapeworm pills. Okay, remember that initial image, illustration on the first slide? You're going to see what color that dress should have been. 1800s, the killer, silent killer, was the arsenic-infused dress. In 1775, advancements in chemistry enabled the creation of this, and it's called Schloss, S-C-H-L-O-S-S, Shields, excuse me, S-C-H-E-E-L-E, green dye, also known as Schloss green. 1814, an improved version was invented, and it was widely known as Paris green, or many of us remembered, emerald green. This new shade turned the most bland dresses into a most vibrant, enduring green, and was all the rage in the Victorian era fashion. Now, this is a young Queen Victoria, lower left, wearing emerald green fashion. And here is a dress, 1865, last year of the American Civil War. There's a lot of Civil War dated stuff here. Dyed with arsenic green. Arsenic just happened to be odorless, tasteless, deadly, and in almost everything. For example, artists would get sick from ingesting arsenic paint on their brushes and then using their lips to get a sharp point on a paintbrush. Arsenic-laced paints and wallpapers were also popular because of arsenic's insecticidal qualities, which also was used to kill rats in Parisian sewers. Treating your walls prevented ants, termites, and other pests from eating you out of the house and home. Unfortunately, excuse me, it could poison more than just insects and rodents. Children who ate sweets colored with the dye were reported to have died. Fashionable ball gowns contained as much as 1/2 of their weight in arsenic. The British Medical Journal said a woman in a green ball gown could, quote, slay the whole of the admirers she may meet within a half dozen ballrooms. And here, some of the facts. Looking real good here, huh? And this is a gag entitled, Does This Color Make Me Look Too Pale? And all that kind of stuff. Now, workers who created the garments, primarily seamstresses, inhaled the dye and suffered the most from the effects of arsenic poisoning. And that illustration there, or painting, is 1854. Starting with headaches, they soon experienced cramps, convulsions, visual impairment, which could evolve into a coma and then death. Now, that's the first image that we saw today on the slide. It's also known as the arsenic waltz, and there's another moniker that it's also known as called the dance of death, and it's appropriately shaded green. Worst of all, arsenic could be found in other dyes too. And eventually, it wasn't just green. So it could go into most any plain dress, which could be a dress to die for. Arsenic, this is great, was known as the inheritance powder. Can you connect those dots at all? Because people would often use it to kill, poison family members to gain the inheritance. By 1870, the green reputation caught up with itself, prompting new dyes to be manufactured, supposedly without arsenic. Okay, powdered wigs. Mid-17th, 18th century marked the heyday for powdered wigs for both men and women. The men followed the trend of two cousins. They were kings, Louis XIV and Charles II. They were cousins. Both of them had lost their hair. Louis had experienced premature hair loss at the age of 17, and he hired 48 wig makers to take care of that. Charles II, to his right, was prematurely gray and had these little head sores. Courtiers started wearing wigs, and the trend trickled down to merchant class, and they opted for the full wig, which is what you see down here, called the peruke. And it gave one the illusion of status, wealth, and knowledge. And he is also known as the bigwig. Coin to describe snobs who could afford big, poofy perukes. More elaborate wigs cost more than $10,000 back in the day. That's unbelievable. Anyway, in today's currency. Women use partial wigs with natural hair to create excessively ornate styles. They were so expensive that women kept them around for weeks just to justify the expense. So why were wigs, which were made out of horse, goat, and human hair, powdered? Well, I think you can guess. Elaborate wigs were also dressed in lard. You got it. That attracted vermin, primarily lice. Here we go, our little friendly buddy, which bit at night and required itching. Lice live their entire life on a human scalp and fed exclusively on human blood. Ladies unable to reach into their luxurious locks use rods like this to scratch their heads or risk being eaten alive by their hair-dwelling friends. To combat the unfortunate odor, lard kind of smells after a while, that would build up over time and control the unwanted parasites, wig makers would powder or fumigate their wig. The powder was usually made up of finely ground starch and scented with lavender. And here we are, folks. This is the initial powder room. Everybody has heard that phrase. It was coined because it's an individual room that was required because the process was so messy. Now, for your information, G.W. never wore a wig. His hair was powdered for appearances. However, our next four presidents, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, all wore wigs. In the late 18th to early 19th century, the wig trend began dying out due to cost and philosophy. The Age of Enlightenment brought a new mentality. Educated men were supposed to be more concerned with the plight of the common man and didn't want to be associated with nobility. Citizens in revolutionary France ousted the peruke And the Brits stopped wearing wigs after William Pitt levied a tax on hair powder in 1795. Short hair became the new craze in the 19th century and continued on to 200 years, as you can tell tonight. Get older, lose. Okay, this is priceless. Can you see a problem? I mean, really, this is incredible. Following the discovery of X-rays in 1895, doctors around the world turned their primitive X-ray machines on everything, from their own hands to patients with cancer and tuberculosis. Albert C. Geyser, G-E-Y-S-E-R, a brash German immigrant who graduated from the New York Med School in 1895, felt X-rays were clearly the future of the medicine. Researchers noted that exposure to X-rays had a remarkable side effect. It made your hair fall out. A fervor swept through the beauty circles, which Dr. Geyser noted. So, in 1924, he develops this baby over here, and it's called the Trico system, which led to the darkest chapter of hair removal quackery in the United States history. Billed, you could say what it's billed as. Removing hair with X-rays was harmless and infallible. Now, get this for the training who administered this to a young person that would come in, typically a lady. After 2 whole weeks of training, beauticians, not medically qualified, would then lease this X-ray training device for use in salons across the US and Canada. This, quote, cure for unwanted hair turned out to be far more dangerous than anyone could have ever imagined. Just for your information, remember Geyser? I mentioned he was the guy that started all this. Well, he lost all his fingers, along with his metacarpal bones, 1 row of carpal bones, and his left hand to stop the spread of cancer. And he also lost his right hand to ulcers. So it didn't work for the inventor very well either. In any event, young women, young female clients would receive a 4-minute dose of X-rays directly to the face, and that's what they do. They look right in here. That's the device. For 4 minutes. Oh, boy. Often once a week for several months. Besides finding the loss of hair was permanent, many ended up severely disfigured and required multiple surgeries to remove cancerous growth and tumors. The Trico system victims have been estimated in the thousands. 1932, this fantastic system was abandoned. In 1970, a study found that 35% of the radiation-induced cancers in women over a 46-year period could be traced to X-ray hair removal practices. The effects have been dubbed, quote, the North American Hiroshima Maiden Syndrome. Now, this concludes the 13 deadly trends. But everybody asks, okay, what's going on today? Now, I've just got 1 slide, so I'm just going to touch base on it. Obviously, tattoos, you get hepatitis C. You just got to watch it, obviously. Tanning could lead to squamous cell carcinoma and melanoma, skin cancers. Now, this is important. The World Health Organization, WHO, International Agency for Research on Cancer, has identified tanning beds and lamps in the highest cancer risk category, along with plutonium and cigarettes. Single use increases the risk, and occasional sessions can triple the risk. Now, down here, that's real stylish, right? What could go wrong with that? Besides the obvious issue of raising oneself to an unnatural height on such a small and tenuous base, possibly resulting in a fall and its possible consequences, other issues could be a thickened Achilles tendon, shortened calf muscles, ingrown toenails, corns, irritated ligaments and nerves, neuromas, calluses, bunions, hammer toes, and are detrimental to a woman's posture and walking gait. They also cause the hips and the spine to come out of alignment as the center of the mass is pushed forward, creating a pressure on the forefoot and balls of the feet. And of course, everybody's extremely familiar with Botox. Again, it's gone through a lot of heat, and if done properly, I guess it works fine. It was approved, although approved by the FDA, there's still a risk of toxins spreading throughout one's body. A lot of, it can go on, resulting in respiratory distress and problems with swallowing, and in more severe cases, the risk of death. So, that's just a few of the things that are going on today. I'm going to wrap up right now. Finally, as a result of this presentation that I've been giving now for, it's well over a year, I'm periodically asked to comment on the human species' never-ending quest for beauty. Now, I am no expert. However, I have found the supreme being to answering that questions. And I'm going to turn it over to the preeminent authority on the topic who graces us with the following sage words. You can rate it. Just give them a shot. Nothing else need be said. I hope you all have enjoyed the ride. It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.